The night was quiet inside the international terminal, but Emery's instincts told her something was wrong. She sat in the waiting lounge, her backpack pressed against her chest, pretending to scroll through her phone. Yet her sharp eyes scanned every reflection in the glass windows. A man in a gray jacket had been watching her for too long. Not openly, not obviously, but in the way predators studied prey. Each time Emery shifted her seat, the man repositioned himself. Each time she looked away, he tilted his head just enough to keep her in his line of sight. She exhaled slowly, calming her heartbeat. Stay invisible, stay calm. That was the rule she had lived by for months. But tonight, something was different. As boarding was announced, Emery walked toward the gate, forcing her steps to remain casual. She had learned long ago that danger thrived on panic. The gray jacket man followed at a distance, his phone pressed unnaturally close to his mouth, whispering to someone unseen. On the jet bridge, Emery's senses sharpened. The hum of engines, the chatter of passengers, the metallic echo of footsteps, it all blended into noise. But she caught something out of place, a faint tapping. Someone ahead of her, a teenage girl, was moving her fingers awkwardly against her carry-on bag. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. Emery's eyes narrowed. It wasn't random, it was Morse code. She slowed just enough to catch the rhythm. The girl's lips never moved, her eyes forward, but the message repeated. Help, danger. A chill rippled down Emery's spine. The girl didn't even glance back, but her silent SOS was clear. Whoever she was, she couldn't cry out loud. Someone was controlling her. Emery entered the plane and slipped into her seat near the back. Though her ticket was for a different row, she wanted distance, perspective. From there, she could see the gray jacket man still lingering near the front, whispering into his phone. And the girl. She sat rigidly by the window, her knuckles white against the armrest. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. Emery leaned back, her face calm but her mind racing. Someone's in trouble. And I might be the only one who noticed. The engines roared to life, and the plane lifted into the dark sky. Straight into a storm Emery hadn't expected. The plane climbed steadily, its wings cutting through layers of thick, restless clouds. Cabin lights flickered faintly as turbulence rattled trays and overhead compartments. Most passengers laughed nervously, pulling seatbelts tighter, but Emery didn't laugh. She had seen storms before, this wasn't just weather. She glanced at her watch. Exactly 12 minutes since takeoff. The man in the gray jacket had changed seats, slipping closer to the cockpit. He was calm. Too calm. And each movement of his lips against the phone hidden in his hand screamed secrecy. Emery's eyes returned to the girl at the window seat. Her posture hadn't changed, rigid, frozen, knuckles white as she clutched the armrest. A flight attendant leaned down to ask if she was okay. But the girl shook her head quickly, eyes darting toward the cockpit. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, her fingers twitched against her knee, repeating the pattern Emery had caught earlier. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Danger. Help. Emery's instincts sharpened. This wasn't random. Someone had silenced that girl, and the silence itself was screaming. A loud ding echoed through the cabin as the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. We are experiencing minor turbulence. Please remain seated. His tone was wrong, flat, forced, like someone reading lines at gunpoint. Emery had spent enough years studying voices to recognize tension disguised as calm. She adjusted in her seat, her hand brushing the hidden pouch in her backpack. Inside was nothing deadly, nothing that could raise alarms at airport security, but everything she needed to survive. Rope, a multi-tool, a flashlight no bigger than a thumb. Tools that could turn the odds. The turbulence grew sharper. Drinks spilled, a baby cried, and passengers exchanged uneasy glances. But Emery's focus remained on the cockpit door, locked tight with its reinforced steel. She counted seconds between every announcement. Too long, too scripted. Something was brewing up front. Suddenly, the girl in the window seat jerked. A tall man in uniform, a co-pilot, had stepped out of the cockpit briefly. He leaned down and whispered something to her. His hand rested on her shoulder just a second too long. Her body stiffened, her jaw clenched. When he walked away, she didn't look relieved, she looked crushed. Emery's chest tightened. She's their hostage. The girl shifted again, tapping a new sequence on her thigh. Emery focused hard, translating the broken rhythm. Not storm, control, help. Emery's pulse raced. The turbulence wasn't natural. Someone was controlling the plane, either manually or through sabotage. She glanced around the cabin. Everyone else seemed oblivious, distracted by flickering seatbelt signs and shaking luggage bins. No one was watching closely enough. No one but her. Leaning slightly forward, Emery caught the girl's eyes in the reflection of the window. Just a flash. Just enough. Emery blinked twice, slow and deliberate, a signal. I hear you. I understand. The girl's lips parted, but again no words came. Her eyes watered as she looked away quickly, terrified of being caught. The cabin crew walked by again, but Emery noticed their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Too stiff. Too professional. Were they scared too, or part of the game? She pulled her backpack a little closer, disguising the movement as adjusting her seatbelt. If this plane was under someone else's control, every second mattered. She needed to figure out who was enemy, who was ally, and how much time they had left before whatever plan was in motion reached its end. Her mind replayed the details. Gray jacket man whispering. The captain's unnatural voice. The co-pilot's menacing grip on the girl's shoulder. The storm that wasn't really a storm, pieces of a puzzle forming but not yet complete. Then, another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're adjusting course slightly for your safety. Emery's heart sank. Adjusting course? But she had checked the flight path on the screen moments ago. They were no longer heading toward their intended destination. The plane was drifting off track, slow enough not to raise alarms, but deliberate. Passengers clapped nervously as if turbulence had passed. They had no idea. Emery leaned back, her eyes half closed, playing the role of another drowsy traveler. But inside, every sense was on fire. She wasn't just another passenger anymore. She was the only one who knew that within minutes the fate of everyone on board would depend on her next move, and the clock was already ticking. The hum of the engines filled the silence, but Emery could hear something else beneath it, an undercurrent of tension that no one else seemed to notice. Passengers were settling in, oblivious. A businessman typed furiously on his laptop. A mother soothed her crying child. A couple laughed quietly over an in-flight movie, normal distractions. But Emery knew normal when she saw it, and this wasn't it. Her eyes locked once again on the cockpit door, a heavy reinforced barrier, one that had seen more than its share of secrets since airlines had fortified them years ago. She remembered training sessions long ago, scenarios of hijackings, emergencies, split-second decisions, and right now every instinct told her that door was hiding something. The gray jacket man hadn't touched his seatbelt once. His body was loose, restless like a predator waiting for the right moment. He wasn't just a nervous traveler. He was connected to whatever was happening up front. A flight attendant passed by offering water. Emery accepted, smiling politely, her eyes scanning the woman's trembling hands. Not nervous about turbulence, nervous about something else. Her smile was painted on, mechanical. Thank you, Emery whispered, watching her closely. The attendant gave a quick nod, then hurried away. Emery didn't miss the glance the woman shot at the gray jacket man before disappearing behind the curtain. The pieces were fitting together, but the picture wasn't complete. Emery reached for the in-flight screen in front of her and tapped to pull up the flight map. Her suspicion hardened. The plane wasn't just slightly off course anymore. It was drifting steadily east, a deviation no pilot would allow without explanation. She memorized the trajectory, committing each shift to memory. She leaned back in her seat, the water untouched in her hand, and studied the girl by the window again. Her body language screamed captivity, still as stone, her eyes occasionally darting to the cockpit door, then back to her lap. Then it happened again. The faint tapping. Her fingers pressed against her thigh, just enough to make sound if someone listened carefully. Emery tuned in, blocking out every other noise. Not safe. Pilot, not pilot. The words hit like a strike of lightning. Emery's pulse quickened. The pilot himself was compromised. That voice earlier, flat and unnatural. It wasn't the man who was supposed to be in command. Whoever was flying this plane was not their true captain. She needed confirmation, evidence. Anything that could prove her instincts weren't just paranoia. Emery stood slowly, stretching as though she were simply restless. She walked toward the restroom near the cockpit, careful to mask her intent. The aisle swayed beneath her feet as the plane rocked, and passengers barely noticed her passing. Near the curtain separating first class, she paused. Voices. Muffled, but sharp. She tilted her head, listening. Stay on course. They won't suspect. 12 minutes until... The curtain shifted and Emery quickly ducked into the restroom. She locked the door, her breath controlled but shallow. Whoever they were planning something timed. She splashed water on her face, forcing herself to remain calm. In the small mirror, her reflection looked back, eyes sharp, jaw set. You've been here before. You've handled worse. But this time, dozens of innocent lives were at stake, and every second of inaction could cost them. She emerged, moving casually back down the aisle. But as she passed, she felt it. The gray jacket man's eyes drilling into her back. He knew she was listening. Emery slipped back into her seat, grabbing her backpack with steady hands. She opened it just enough to brush her fingers against the multi-tool hidden inside. She wouldn't use it yet. Not unless she had no choice. The girl by the window risked one more look, her eyes wide, pleading. Emery gave the faintest nod, a silent promise. I'll get you out of this. The engines groaned louder as the plane veered again. Emery glanced at the map. They weren't east anymore. Now they were heading south toward open water. The intercom crackled once more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. Please remain calm. We are making a minor adjustment. Emery's grip tightened on the armrest. That voice didn't belong to a trained pilot. It belonged to someone pretending. Someone forcing authority they didn't own. A ripple of unease swept through her chest. They weren't just off course. They were being taken. Her options were narrowing. She could wait, gather more evidence, and risk losing control completely. Or she could move soon and confront the danger head-on. As if answering her thoughts, the gray jacket man stood abruptly and walked toward the cockpit. The flight attendant didn't stop him. She simply stepped aside, lowering her gaze. Emery's breath caught. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was confirmation. Whatever was happening behind that locked door was about to unfold. And Emery knew one thing for certain. If she didn't act, no one else on this plane would, and the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to erupt inside. The gray jacket man vanished into the cockpit, the reinforced door clicking shut behind him. Emery's heart drummed in her chest. The passengers around her didn't even blink. They thought it was routine. Only she knew it wasn't. She took a slow breath, calculating. If she moved too soon, she'd expose herself. If she waited too long, they'd lose altitude, drift farther off course, and the girl by the window, along with everyone else, would have no chance. Her eyes darted to the girl again. This time the tapping was faster, urgent. Emery strained to read it. Soon, danger, hurry. The girl's fingers froze the moment the co-pilot stepped out. His tall frame filled the aisle, his uniform crisp but his eyes cold. He scanned the cabin like a hawk, landing for a moment on Emery. His lips curled faintly as if he'd already marked her as a problem. He whispered something into his sleeve, then walked back toward the cockpit. The door hissed open briefly, and in that instant Emery glimpsed something. Gloved hands gripping the controls. A shadowed figure who wasn't the captain she saw at boarding. Her suspicion was truth now. The plane had been hijacked from the inside. She leaned forward, her mind racing. How to get in? That door was reinforced steel, impossible to break without brute force or codes. She didn't have either. But she did have timing, skill, and the element of surprise. A nervous cough broke her focus. The mother with the baby looked pale, her water bottle trembling in her hand. Excuse me, Emery whispered, leaning across the aisle. Do you mind pressing the attendant button? I think the baby might need something. The woman nodded, relieved to have a distraction. She pressed it. The ding echoed through the cabin. Seconds later, the attendant appeared. The same woman Emery had noticed earlier. Shaking hands, plastered smile. Emery caught her wrist gently as she leaned down. Their eyes locked. You're scared too, Emery murmured under her breath, barely audible. The woman's face stiffened. She glanced quickly toward the cockpit, then back to Emery. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. Fear clear in her eyes. Then she straightened and forced the smile again. Of course, ma'am. Right away. She walked off quickly, but Emery had seen enough. The crew wasn't fully in control. At least one of them was coerced. She slipped her hand into her backpack, brushing her multi-tool, when suddenly the intercom crackled again. Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. We are entering another patch of turbulence. Please stay seated. But the plane wasn't shaking. The air was smooth. The lie was too blatant to ignore then. The first sharp tilt. Drinks spilled, passengers gasped, and the overhead compartments rattled violently. The girl clutched the armrest, panic written across her face. Emery gritted her teeth. They were testing control, deliberately destabilizing the plane. She stood quickly, making her way up the aisle under the chaos of turbulence. Passengers were too busy bracing themselves to notice her slipping forward. She reached the curtain near first class and paused, listening. Inside, muffled but clear, came the voices. Coordinates locked in. They'll never see it coming. Keep her quiet. Her pulse quickened. Coordinates locked in? They were steering the plane toward a target. The door beeped. Someone was about to exit. Emery pressed herself against the bulkhead as the co-pilot stepped out again. He adjusted his sleeve mic, muttering, "All clear." It was now or never. Emery lunged. In one swift motion, she slammed her elbow into his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. His eyes widened in shock as she twisted his wrist, forcing the comm device from his hand. He staggered, but before he could cry out, she delivered a precise strike to his throat. He collapsed silently, gasping, his body sliding against the wall. Passengers gasped behind her. Some screamed. Emery turned, finger pressed to her lips. "Stay quiet," she hissed. The gray jacket man's shout came from inside the cockpit. "What's going on out there?" Emery grabbed the co-pilot's ID badge and swiped it against the cockpit lock. The panel blinked red. Denied. She cursed under her breath. Of course they'd changed codes. The door handle rattled from the inside. She had seconds. She dragged the co-pilot's limp body to the side and crouched low. Multi-tool flicked open. The door cracked open, and the gray jacket man appeared, fury on his face. "You!" Emery surged forward, slamming the edge of the multi-tool against his wrist. The weapon he was holding clattered to the floor. She drove her shoulder into his chest, forcing him back a step, just enough to wedge her foot in the door before it slammed shut. For a moment, the two locked eyes, hers blazing with determination, his with ruthless calculation. Then chaos erupted. He shoved back, yelling into the cockpit, "She's onto us!" The cabin exploded in panic. Passengers screamed. Flight attendants rushed forward, and the girl by the window tapped furiously against her thigh. Emery gritted her teeth, pushing harder against the door. Her muscles strained. She didn't have the code, but she had something better, unyielding resolve. If she couldn't open it by stealth, she'd tear it open by force, because behind that door lay the truth, and behind that truth lay every soul on this plane, and Emery wasn't about to let them die. The door buckled under the weight of their struggle. Emery shoved her shoulder against it, muscles burning as she forced it open inch by inch. The gray jacket man snarled, shoving back with all his strength. Behind him she could hear the whine of the engines climbing, a pitch too sharp, too dangerous. "Get her out," a voice barked from inside. The fake pilot. The man lunged, trying to slam the door shut, but Emery twisted low, sweeping his legs. He stumbled, crashing backward into the aisle. Passengers shrieked, some covering their children's eyes, others fumbling for their phones. Emery stepped over him, snatching up the weapon he had dropped earlier, a short, tactical blade. Her grip tightened as she swung the cockpit door open. What she saw inside confirmed every suspicion. The real captain was slumped in the corner, wrists zip-tied, gagged, his uniform rumpled and blood on his temple. At the controls sat another man in a stolen pilot's jacket, eyes locked on the instruments, steering the plane off course. His hands were steady, trained. Not just a criminal, but someone who knew how to fly. "Step back," Emery commanded, her voice low and firm. The fake pilot turned, his mouth twisting into a cold smile. "You're too late." He jerked the controls and the plane lurched violently to the left. Passengers screamed as the cabin tilted, drinks and bags tumbling to the floor. The overhead lights flickered, warning alarms chiming from the console. Emery didn't hesitate. She dove forward, slamming the fake pilot's wrist against the throttle. He grunted, releasing it for a moment, but spun with surprising agility, throwing an elbow toward her jaw. Emery blocked it with her forearm, countering with a strike to his ribs. The cramped cockpit became a storm of fists, elbows, and desperate grappling. Every second the plane shook under their fight, altitude slipping dangerously. "Get her out of here," the fake pilot roared. The gray jacket man scrambled up from the floor behind her, lunging into the cockpit. Emery spun, slamming the door shut with her heel just as he reached for her. His hand was crushed in the frame and he howled, retreating in pain. The lock clicked. Now it was just her, the unconscious real captain and the imposter. The fake pilot snarled, ripping a sidearm from under the console. "I'll crash this plane before I let you stop me." Emery's pulse spiked, but her hands were steady. She feinted left, then surged forward, slamming the multi-tool blade into his forearm. The gun clattered across the cockpit floor, lodging under the captain's chair. The fake pilot roared in fury, swinging a wild punch. Emery ducked, grabbing his jacket collar and slamming his head against the console. Warning alarms shrieked as buttons were accidentally pressed, altitude plunging faster now. The entire plane rattled, oxygen masks dangling loose. Passengers outside screamed as the cabin tilted nose down. "Pull it up," Emery shouted, shoving him aside and grabbing the yoke. But the fake pilot wasn't finished. He lunged again, hands clawing at her neck, dragging her back. Emery gasped for air, vision dimming, but her elbow struck true, driving into his stomach. He stumbled and she slammed him into the cabin wall. Her knuckles bloodied, lungs burning, Emery forced herself back to the controls. The altimeter screamed, they were plummeting. She yanked the yoke with both hands, muscles screaming, every fiber of her being focused on pulling the plane up. For a terrifying heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, resistance. The nose lifted slowly, groaning against gravity. The engines howled, straining, but the descent slowed. The fake pilot roared again, throwing himself at her. Emery caught him mid-lunge, twisting his arm and slamming him onto the cockpit floor. He writhed beneath her, but she pinned him with brutal precision, multi-tool pressed to his throat. "Who are you working for?" she hissed. He spat blood, smirking. "You'll never stop it." This flight was just the beginning. Emery's jaw clenched. She struck the side of his head and he went limp, unconscious. The cabin filled with heavy breathing, alarms still wailing. She glanced back at the real captain, bound and gagged. Without wasting a second, she sliced the zip ties, pulling the gag from his mouth. He coughed, eyes wide with disbelief. What? "No time," Emery cut him off. "Help me stabilize this plane." Together, they gripped the controls, leveling the wings. The descent slowed, altitude climbing again. Passengers screamed in relief as the cabin steadied, though they had no idea how close death had come. Outside, storm clouds split to reveal clear night skies. The city lights glimmered far below, too far off course but still reachable. Emery exhaled, sweat dripping from her brow. The danger wasn't over, but for the first time since takeoff, survival felt possible. The captain shot her a bewildered glance. "You just saved 200 lives," Emery shook her head. "Not yet. Whoever planned this won't stop here." She bound the fake pilot with his own zip ties, kicking his weapon further under the console. Then she gripped the intercom. Her voice echoed through the cabin, steady and unshaken. "This is Emery, stay calm. The situation is under control." But deep down, she knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because one question still hung in the air, heavier than the storm outside. If this was just the beginning, what was waiting for them when they landed? The cockpit was a mess. Blood smeared on the console, alarms flashing red across the screens, and the limp body of the fake pilot slumped against the wall. The hum of the engines, though steady now, felt louder in the silence that followed the chaos. Emery sat in the co-pilot's chair, her chest heaving, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had pulled the plane back from the brink, but the weight of 200 lives still pressed against her shoulders. Every movement, every decision mattered. The real captain flexed his raw wrists, shaking off the numbness from the zip ties. His face was pale, but his hands were steady as he adjusted the controls. "I've been flying 30 years, he rasped, voice thick with disbelief. "Never thought I'd see my own plane stolen under my nose." Emery's eyes stayed locked on the horizon. "You've got it now, just keep us level." He glanced sideways at her. "And you? You're not crew. Who are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the intercom again. Her voice was firm, calm, designed to steady the chaos behind the cockpit door. "Attention passengers, the situation is contained. Please remain seated and do not panic. We are safe." The words echoed through the cabin. A ripple of uneasy relief followed. Whispers, sighs, even a few muffled cheers. But Emery knew safety was temporary. Behind her, the unconscious imposter stirred, a low groan slipping from his throat. Emery turned sharply, pressing her boot against his chest. "Stay down," she growled, multi-tool still in hand. The captain shot her a wary glance. "We should restrain him properly." "I already did," she said, nodding at the zip ties binding his wrists. "But men like him don't stop just because you tie them down." She knelt, gripping the man's chin, forcing his eyes open. "Who sent you?" she demanded. His lips curled into a faint, bloody smile. "You really think this ends here? You've saved them for now, but the storm's still coming." Emery's jaw tightened. She slammed his head back against the wall, hard enough to silence him, but not enough to knock him out completely. His cryptic words gnawed at her. The captain adjusted the radio, but static hissed back. "Comms are jammed, I can't reach air traffic control." Of course they were. Whoever had orchestrated this had thought ahead. The cabin phone buzzed. Emery snatched it up before the captain could. A flight attendant's frantic voice spilled through. "We've got panicked passengers. Some are demanding answers, and the man in the gray jacket is gone." Emery froze. She had last seen him outside the cockpit, hand crushed in the doorframe. He'd vanished in the chaos. Her eyes flicked to the unconscious pilot at her feet. "He's not alone," she muttered. Before she could say more, a sharp bang rattled the cockpit door. Then another. The captain's face paled. "He's trying to break back in." Emery's muscles tensed. The gray jacket man wasn't giving up. If he got inside, the fight would start all over again. Only this time the passengers' panic could spiral into full chaos. "Lock the door," she ordered. "It already is," the captain snapped, gripping the controls tighter as turbulence shook the cabin. The pounding continued, louder, more desperate. Emery's mind raced. She couldn't stay pinned in this cockpit forever. If he rallied the passengers against her, or worse, if he carried another weapon, the situation could flip in seconds. She leaned down, grabbing the unconscious pilot's comm device. She clicked it on, scrolling through the last channel used. A distorted voice spilled out, chilling and confident. "Phase 1 complete. Prepare for extraction." Her blood ran cold. Phase 1? Extraction? This wasn't just a hijack. It was part of something bigger. The captain glanced at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Emery said grimly, "this plane isn't the only target." The banging on the door grew louder, sharper, metal straining under the assault. The passengers outside screamed. Emery's grip on her multi-tool tightened. "Keep this bird steady," she told the captain. Then, without hesitation, she pulled open the emergency toolkit beside the seat. Inside lay a flare gun, standard issue for signaling in case of survival landings. She checked the chamber, loaded, and pointed it at the cockpit door. The captain blinked. "You're not actually going to whatever's on the other side." Emery cut him off, eyes cold. "Isn't walking through." The door dented inward with another crash. Emery's muscles coiled like springs, every nerve on fire. And then, silence. The pounding stopped. Emery didn't lower the gun. Silence was worse. Silence meant planning. Her heart pounded as she waited, every second stretching longer than the last. The storm outside had cleared, but a greater storm lingered inside this metal coffin hurtling through the sky. Finally, the intercom crackled again. Not the captain, not the crew. A new voice, smooth, confident, deadly. "You've done well, Emery," it said. "But this game isn't over. Land that plane safely if you can. We'll be waiting for you." The line went dead. Emery's stomach knotted. Whoever they were, they knew her name. And that meant she wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was part of something far bigger and far darker than anyone on this flight could imagine. The storm had passed, but inside the aircraft, the air was heavier than ever. Emery stood by the cockpit door, flare gun still in her hand, her finger resting on the trigger. The silence outside was suffocating, broken only by the nervous murmurs of passengers. The captain cleared his throat, voice steady but low. "We're on approach. 30 minutes until landing." 30 minutes. To Emery, it felt like a lifetime. Somewhere beyond that door, the man in the gray jacket was waiting. Whether he was armed or not didn't matter. He had numbers on his side. Desperate passengers could be weaponized just as easily as guns. Emery's thoughts raced back to the cryptic voice on the comms. "We'll be waiting for you." Whoever they were, they knew her name. That made this personal. The cockpit door shuddered once, then stilled again. This time, no pounding followed. Just quiet. That was worse. She pressed the intercom button, her voice firm. "This flight is under control. Stay calm. No one leaves their seat until we're on the ground." A ripple of obedience passed through the cabin, though fear still lingered in the air like smoke. The runway lights appeared in the distance, thin streaks of gold against the endless black. Relief should have washed over her, but Emery's gut twisted tighter. Landings were the most vulnerable moments. If the gray jacket man wanted to strike, he would wait until the chaos of touchdown. The captain guided the plane lower, the engines roaring as the wheels prepared to drop. Emery braced herself, gun raised, eyes fixed on the door. Then, it happened. A single sharp click from outside the cockpit, the sound of a lock being tampered with. Her muscles tightened. The timing was perfect. Just as the plane dipped toward the runway, the cockpit door began to creak open. Passengers screamed. The captain cursed. Emery raised the flare gun steady as stone. The door opened an inch, then Emery fired. A blinding red flare shot forward, filling the cabin with searing light and smoke. The gray jacket man recoiled with a howl, retreating into chaos. The plane touched down with a violent screech, rubber burning against asphalt. The impact jolted every passenger, but the wheels held. Emery stood firm, smoke swirling around her like a shield. She had bought them seconds, enough for survival. As the plane slowed, her eyes burned through the haze. She knew one thing for certain. This battle was over. But the war had just begun.